I'm Sue Hatch. I'm chair of the seminar committee, and we are delighted to have you here to be able to have us discuss rooting. Now, the mics work for the Zoom. So, yeah, and I'll explain that in a second. So we're going to discuss rooting and relating during change with Reverend Laura, who's already, I understand, been introduced in church. And let me explain about the mics. We're recording the session, and it's also on Zoom. So before you speak, it's an interactive session. This session will be interactive. Before you speak, please raise your hand, and we will get a mic to you. Jeff is going to man this side of the room. I'll be on that side of the room. And I think we have somebody in transition team going to be looking. Okay, so we'll be able to also get those questions. But before you speak, please be sure that you have a microphone, or else we won't be able to record what you say, and it won't be, the people on Zoom won't be able to hear. All right. Okay. Well, with no further ado, please take it away.
Good to be with you all again this morning. I'm looking forward to our time together. And I had the chance to be with your lay leaders yesterday. That was wonderful. I'll be sharing a little bit of what I shared with them yesterday, but most of this I want to be conversational between you all. But let's start with, because change can be somewhat of an anxiety provoking topic. I want to start with this quote. And this is from Marianne McKibben Dana's Hope, a User's Manual, which I highly recommend. In addition to orienting us, hope also keeps us the right size. If we have it all figured out, if the future is full of certainties we've sketched out on our whiteboards, we don't require hope anymore. More than looking into the crystal ball and identifying emerging trends, I think the real future proofing is to lean into hope, to clarify our values and build skills to survive the onslaught of change. And so that last half a sentence there is really where I want to hone in today, clarifying values and building skills, building understanding around change that helps us navigate that change as well as possible. And so I want you to get into pairs. There we go. And preferably, I want you to get into a pair with someone you don't know as well. And I want you to talk about these three things. When did I become a part of UCG? What drew me here? What keeps me here? And I'm going to give you about 5 minutes total. So about 2.5 minutes each. Let's go 6 minutes. I bet y'all will have some stories. So 3 minutes each. I'll tell you when to switch. Find someone you don't know as well. Talk about these two things.
I'm going to put you in a breakout room so you'll have another person to chat with. And I put the questions in the chat so you'll still have them.
And for the folks on Zoom, if y'all could go into 2-person breakout rooms, that'd be great. Those of you on Zoom, you're also welcome just to type in the chat if that's easier.
I've sent a little message that should invite you to join the breakout room. So it should be a little box that pops up. And if you click that button, it'll send you to a room. And if not, you're welcome to just turn your camera on and chat here or put your messages in the chat.
Alabama.
Alabama. Are you teaching the US?
Oh, no,
That's just.
I'm sure you could have talked for much longer. There was great energy. It seemed like there was great conversation, which is fantastic. But is there a phrase that bubbled up in your pair that you'd like to share with the whole room about what drew you here and what keeps you here? And if so, raise your hand. We'll have a mic come to you.
The phrase was corporate culture.
Ooh.
The corporate culture of this church kept me in it.
Can you say what you mean by corporate?
Being is what the expectations are, what the values are, what the mission is, what goes on and has historically gone on. I think no institution is perfect, but when you at least have the intention there and the framework, it's what happens. And the corporate culture here is something I trust.
Okay, thank you.
I think the word participatory was a key in our discussion, and that's participate an opportunity for everybody, no matter what their age, from child to elderly and the adults, to participate in some way, either in the musical program, in social justice activities, community service, and other things, and children.
Absolutely. And we saw that this morning, right? Even with the children, Talia kind of building the children's sermon with the kids.
Good morning, good afternoon. What brought me to UG is like this right here. I told people around the group, I was telling them, I didn't bring myself, but God brought me him. Cause I used to pass behind the car, walk, and I stayed across the street over there with a friend of mine. I just had foot surgery. When I get out of this UG is a lot. I get love, care, support. It goes on and on the list of us for this place. I'm serious. Because I can feel the love of God here every time I come here. Everything is big, you know, and stuff. From the older people to young people, everything. There's a lot goes on here, and I love it. What they did on that trip, it made my heart burst and cry and say, thank you, Lord Jesus. No, for the people that they can learn how to do things. Because, you know, when I see things in life is, you know, what God shows me and gives me to see. Like, you know, we need more love, more caring, more respect and trust and everything. Faith involved with God. First, love him, love yourself, like the Bible says. Because man will fail you. God will never fail you. He will never forsake you and leave you. If you got faith in God, best to have it all, because he's the number one in my life.
Amen. Any other? Okay, see a couple.
All right. Okay. I think what brought us back to Gainesville, we went back into a search because we were Unitarians for years, but we decided to kind of check things out elsewhere. We found the UCG, and what we really liked was the warmth and the community, and that's what keeps us. This is a true community, and it's like a big family, and I just don't see myself moving anywhere else.
There was another hand back here, I think. Okay, maybe.
Okay. Jeff?
Alan and I discovered that our children brought us here, his adult children, and Charlie and my 18-month-old son, you know, at different times. That was the impetus for me for finding a church again after not being in church for quite a while. And then what keeps me here is, I think, what keeps everybody. I love the social justice emphasis. It's my spiritual home in a very deep way. And it can also be a lot of fun and lifelong friendships here.
In terms of keeping me here, I think a part of it, a big part of it, is a credible, believable theological outlook that is important to me.
Thank you for sharing that. And we're going.
And just to kind of add to what we just said, I think the phrase "God, however known" was the clincher for us.
So there are theological reasons, there are social reasons, there are justice reasons, there are opportunity to serve reasons. Am I hearing all of those correctly? Children, yes.
You know, you mentioned you came looking for a place for your children, but I know of several parents who have said they come because their children are saying, we need to go. And when the kids are saying this is where they want to be on a Sunday morning, that's incredible.
That's amazing.
For me, it's all of the above, plus the emphasis on the arts, the music, the art, and all of that, and fun that feeds my spirit in yet another way.
Absolutely. And these things are really important pieces to hold on to in times of transition, remembering why you came here and what keeps you here, because that's kind of the tether, that's the touchstone. That is who UCG is. Because even as, you know, different circumstances may change, there are things about who this church is that are constants because they are part of the DNA. So let's switch to talking just a little bit about maybe pointing in the wrong place. There we go. All right. So a little bit about what change is, and I want to differentiate between three terms because we tend to lump them all together: change, transition, and transformation. And I'm going to use change as a shorthand as we talk today, but I want to make a distinction between these three. Change is about the external. It's what we do differently. And maybe it's something we've chosen. Maybe it's something that has been kind of forced upon us, but the change is the behavior. Transition is about seeing things differently. So I might do things differently, but it's not going to stick unless I start to see the world differently. And I'll give an example in just a moment. And then transformation is about altogether being different. So the transition has so deeply rooted that I am altogether a different person. So one example of this is you might move to a new place, and that's the change. You have to drive, you have to find all your new resources, all of that. You have to find a place to live, all of that. So that's the behavior. Transition is when you start to kind of get comfortable in that change. So I can find my way around, I have a routine, those kinds of things. Transformation would be when I call myself, I am a whatever, I am a Tuscaloosan. You know, it is the lens through which everything filters. And we don't always get to the transformation stage, don't always need to. Some change just needs to move into transition, and then that transition needs to complete. It won't necessarily mean we are fundamentally different people, and that's okay. Any questions about these definitions before I move on? Okay. So just to visualize this, this is a model by William Bridges, and it is a bridge model. Ironic. So you've got change as when you start to step out onto a bridge. In the middle is the neutral zone. That's where the transition, the seeing different happens, and that's a process. And then the other side of the bridge is completed transition or transformation. Now, yesterday, we talked about how that is all nice in theory, but really a rope swing is a better representation of what happens in change. So you jump from one side of the river, and then a lot of things can happen. You can just dangle there. You can get stuck in the middle, or you can wait for the momentum to swing you back to the side you came from. Or you can reach the other side. You can even let go and fly and see the possibilities and fully embrace that. We decided that neutral zone was too neutral a term for this middle part because it's really messy and hard. And so we called it mush or chaos instead. Anybody from yesterday want to add anything to this about how this is maybe a little more helpful than there's a change and then we go into transformation and then we go to. Oh, we need a mic back here.
I think most of us yesterday didn't like the flat bridge approach, because when you go on the bridge, you can see everything in front of you. And that's the problem, is not being able to see what's going to happen and trying to decide which path you're going to take. So some of us talked about a bridge like the Sunshine Skyway that you climb a long way. You go through the fears, if you have that kind of person, of getting to the top of that bridge. Then you see a lot of things and you come racing down the other side. And we had, or just being stuck in the middle of the river up to your nose in water, trying to just stay alive or whatever. So there were a lot of people have different experiences of what that process is like.
Yes, absolutely. But they all tend to be a little more complicated than just walking straight across the bridge. Yes.
And Susan Carey introduced the concept of the butterfly and the caterpillar, which is where the mush came from, because the caterpillar turns to total mush before it comes out as a butterfly.
Yes. Yeah. Great. All right. So we all experience change. Change is normal. Change is part of growth. There's a necessity to it. And there is a larger landscape of change as well. So for a long time, the church has been on the verge of change. We no longer live in a culture where church attendance is expected or necessarily even prioritized. And, I'm not putting that is a factual statement. That's not a statement intended to be judgmental. And, in some ways, this is not a bad thing, because the church, at least the Christian church, started as a voice from the margins and had a lot of impact that way. And so this pushes us to think about what church is and what it should be. And then, of course, COVID accelerated a lot of change. This is when many churches began to be multi-site, and multi-site in the sense of in-person, on-site, as well as virtual or online. And that increased the pool of people who could potentially be involved, which is also a good thing, even as it brings some challenges. And also during COVID, people examined their priorities. And that has led to some big shifts in congregations, big shifts in numbers. Let me say, I don't believe that numbers are the best indication of impact. I'm not a numbers person. I think there are much better ways to think about, who we are as a church and what influence we're having on the world. But it did cause those shifts. So that's the larger landscape that we're working in. And then each congregation is experiencing different reasons for change that are specific to it. So you've had some shifts in ministerial staff, for example, and you're looking at some other potential changes, which is why you have a transition team. So that's kind of the larger landscape against which those other things are happening. Any thoughts or questions about that? That makes sense? Okay. All right. So change is hard. It's uncomfortable, even if it's a chosen change. It's because it's different. It's a break from the familiar. It can feel uncontrollable. What do I have control of in the midst of this change or transition? It involves grief. And again, that is grief, even if this is a change that you want, because there is some loss involved. If you're talking about change within a group, we embrace change at different paces. So you may be in different positions on that rope swing than the person sitting next to you. And that's normal, but it does make things a little more complicated. And we can have some hidden fears and assumptions that work against change. And there's some hard work there around unearthing those and beginning to test those so that the change that you say you want to make will stick. And I worked with your leaders some on that yesterday, so they have some resources for helping you think through that. But the reason that I like to work with congregations that are in change is because I really, really, really believe that despite the challenges with change, there are opportunities in change. There are opportunities to build and strengthen connections, and those are connections with each other. Those are connections with God, connections with your larger community or neighborhood. There are chances to learn more about who we are and what we really care about, because those are the things that anchor us during change. And it's a prime time for exploring what could be possible in this season, because the concept of seasons, I think, is important. When you're in change, you're not necessarily making a change that is now and for all time. You may be making a change or a transition for a particular season. Maybe you're going to try something out for a certain period of time and it'll work for that period. And then something else will work in that next season of ministry. And season can last however long. It can be a literal season of a few months, or it can be a season of years. But exploring what is possible, what is the best, most faithful stewardship of our gifts and commitments in this season. Thoughts or questions about the opportunities and change?
UCG, we've been through quite a bit of changes with regard to our pastors especially. And we actually built a whole unit on liminal time, which was very relevant. We realized that, yes, there's this feeling of chaos and unknownness and the difficulty of getting through change, but we also realize, I think, the opportunities that are afforded by it, and that whole concept of liminal time and going through that process that's required when you're just floating.
Yes, and thank you for introducing that vocabulary in that liminal space. It's that thinness between us and God. It's really sacred ground, and that is why it's a time where we can more deeply build our connection to God and to one another, because there are fewer things kind of buffering us against one another. All right, so what I have learned about you all, and certainly I don't know nearly as much about UCG as you know about yourselves, but here are my impressions about why you're in great shape for change. You are creative. And, I talked in worship this morning about how important that is in times of stress and change, to be able to tap into creativity for many reasons. But one of them is that it lets us think bigger than we can when we're kind of locked in anxiety. You're a stable congregation. You show up. You've got great lay leaders. I think the number I heard yesterday was 45 to 50% of those of you who attend are in lay leadership positions of some sort, which is amazing. You embrace the leadership of children and youth. Fantastic. All of these things contribute to your stability. You know who you are, which is huge. There are a lot of congregations out there who do not know who they are, but you have such a strong sense from the things that you were just sharing a moment ago. You know who you are, and that will ground you as you move through changes now and in the future. You are deeply rooted in spirituality and community. Your ties are not just transactional. They are spiritual. They are love for one another. They are love for justice. They are love for God. They are love for your community. All right. So what doesn't change during a transition is who you are in your DNA. And those are your values and your core commitments, which I think you have a good sense of. But let's have a little bit of conversation around that anyway. Who is UCG? So you can stay tapped into that, no matter what changes might come. So you've already shared your personal connections to the church, what drew you here, what keeps you here. Those individual stories are important to your collective identity. But I also want you to think about kind of the legacy that you're pulling forward into the present and future. So we're going to have some small group conversation around history, not in the sense of, that's where we want to live, but that's part of who we are. And we want to continue to draw on that strength now and into the future. So these are some questions I want you to consider in groups of 4 or 5. You can arrange yourselves. Dearly departed, that can be people who have died, or it can be people who just moved on from UCG. So thinking about some of these things, and transition team members, if you will spread yourselves out among these small groups to kind of capture some of this. I did put up a timeline, but for the sake of time, I think let's just record those in the groups, and then those can be captured for the transition team. We can share out some of that. Take about 10 minutes to consider some of these things. So find your group of 4 or 5. Hopefully you've got a transition team member in there who can capture what you're saying, and we'll talk for 10 minutes and then come back together. Any questions before we do?
Right. Hello, everybody. I think we'll just stay in this group instead of going into breakout rooms. I can put in the chat what some of the questions were that we were supposed to discuss. And I'll keep track of your responses so no one has to add or type anything. But I should say I'm Lindsay. I'm the current moderator-elect and the representative from the transition team for the Zoom call. So anybody like to go first?
Well, I'll start. I'm Wendy Wheeler. Hi. And I just joined in January, so I don't have a lot of history with UCG. But from what I understand, you've gone through several transitions already. You started with a couple that were pastors and are still there as the pastor emeritus, whatever that is. I have a sense, at least as I came in, that you've had changes. So, it's not a church that kind of is suddenly presented with something that they're not comfortable with or haven't seen before.
Thanks, Wendy. I know one thing we talked about, Laura Stevens-Reed led a leadership summit for the board chairs yesterday. And one of the things we talked about was there have been a lot of people that have gone that had been here for a long time and that they're still around, right? The Rhymers. Well, Larry's on this call right now. But that their roles and relationships have changed in some ways. So we've had the Rhymers and then Vince and then, of course, more recently, Andy. And that those are maybe, for that first question, some of the folks who have moved on from our congregation in their original roles. So we talked about that a little yesterday. Gary Kirkland spoke a little bit yesterday about and that idea of change, feeling like good about moving forward, but also a little sad at the people who aren't moving forward with us. And, he didn't name anybody by name, but just past members of the church that maybe have moved or aren't attending anymore. Some sadness and grief around the people who aren't still on the journey with us. Maybe we'll skip down a little to, anybody have any thoughts on what are some of the key moments or turning points in our congregation's history? Oh, Lillian, go ahead.
Hi, I'm sorry, I was assigned to group 3 and then I didn't have a chance to put in my answer to what made me move here and what I'm missing. So maybe, this, so I don't know quite how to state it, but what brought me here was that wonderful combination and balance of intellectual, spiritual, and emotional stimulation that I found at UCG when I joined. And I joined back in 2005, I think, 2008, I don't remember. We started coming part-time when we were in Connecticut. So, so that's what I'm missing. And I've been missing that for a long time. I have found wonderful friends here and I continue those friend connections, but I want to come and be raised higher. I need to feel that I'm being stimulated. And I've been missing that for a while. Okay. So that's my 2 cents worth. And I don't know how to put it out there other than this is a vehicle that I found it easier. So Lindsay, if you can somehow integrate that into feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I've added it to the Jamboard. I don't know if you all are familiar with Jamboard, but it's like a virtual Post-it wall. So everyone in person is writing all these responses on Post-its. So I'm adding them to our virtual Post-it wall, and I'll share that.
Maybe you can share some instructions as to how to do that, because I have no idea.
Yeah, I'll share the screen and show you. I put the link in the chat earlier, but it might have gotten a little lost. So this is a Jamboard. And you just click on this little button here and it'll give you your own little Post-it, and you type your message and save it. And then you've got your Post-it added to the wall.
Great.
You access that just by clicking on this link. I'll put it in the chat again in case you want to join.
Great. Thank you very much. And thanks for putting that. That's well stated. Thanks a lot, Lindsay.
Thank you. I don't know, Lillian, maybe some of these other questions kind of speak to what you were bringing up. Are there key moments or changes in the congregation's history? Some of them are listed here: pastoral changes, physical plant changes, conflicts, ministries, that might contribute to that feeling you have?
Pastoral changes for sure. Okay. I think we need to raise the level of what we're seeking. I know this is, recruiting during COVID is very, very hard, but, and I don't know. So pastoral level is a key change for me.
It's a little difficult to have my presence here. I didn't quite mean to get in the middle of it. So it's hard for me to, I'm sure, to have me here not speaking, and yet I don't want to be over influential with speaking either. But I would say that one of the big, I think, issues was that in 1991, we became an open affirming church. Around the same time we built a new building, which were two risky things at the same time. And there was a lot of anxiety about both of those at that time. And we leaned in through those. And I think, there was a lot of ups and downs in that. And it was an important affirmation. The other thing I would say is the church has changed many times. I mean, we were a small church, 100 people. We were a mid-sized church. We were about 400 members when we built the sanctuary. In 91, we've been up to 600 and 700 members. And each time it's meant we were different kinds of people. And then we went through the changes of hiring our first associate minister, Christy Button, who worked with youth and children completely. And then Andy Bachman was with youth and also social justice. And then Vince Amlin, as Sandy and I went to part-time, who had such a strong spiritual and pastoral presence among us. And then moving to Talia coming along, and then Bromley. So each of those has changed who we are. I think one of the big issues right now I see before us is how do we balance, how do we affirm men in the church? It's very easy for men to drop out, to sort of lose their places in the church. And there needs almost to be an affirmative action sometimes to keep men involved. And so by having Andy and Vince both gone, I think a big question I hear among people is how do we have that balance in the leadership? Yes, so that's enough for me. So those good things. And I really appreciate the questions being asked here today and what you're doing, Lindsay.
Thanks, Larry. I think, I know I appreciate hearing your perspective. You're the historian on the call, I think. The most reliable one anyway. I didn't realize that we had become an ONA church back in 91 at the same time that the church was being built. That's really interesting to think about that touch point of change.
And it was a very risky thing at that point. I mean, same-sex marriages weren't legal. Churches were splitting over that right and left. So anyhow, that's just part of the history. But I'm not the most reliable person here. There's a lot of historians among us, so just one.
It's not on this list, but one question that Laura posed to us yesterday that might be relevant is, what are some of the touchstones that we feel we have as a church? That even in the middle of all those changes, what stays the same? Yesterday, some of the answers to that question were things like the people. Alan Hill brought up that, at the end of the day, when we look around, we actually see a lot of the same faces over the years, and that, remembering that we're the church, we, the congregation, and that stays the same. Let's see, I'm trying to think of some of the other answers. Somebody else brought up our mission, always being mission and social justice focused as being a through line despite any changes. Looks like maybe regrouping. So
and you can stay where you are. If you want to just turn your chairs around, that's fine. So knowing that what everyone shared was captured and will be, fodder for the transition team, I would like to hear just one thing from each group that they'd like to put in the whole group conversation as an answer to any of these questions. Can y'all start over here? What's one thing you'd like to share from your conversation?
We talked about all the ministers who've left and how they each brought something unique, but that within the congregation, there are so many people who've sort of drawn on that and also brought stuff. So even when a minister leaves, all kinds of things keep going on.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And I would say how that provided, I called it the soil for everything to spring from, because we all carried all those things with us, and we have a church that has the various facilities to do that. We have lively arts, we've got small groups, we've got all these various ways of doing things that can incorporate and grow on that.
Yeah, so each minister has fertilized the soil a little bit, and then you all continue to tend it and grow it. Yeah.
Yeah.
The church was able to offer space for emerging social issues. And as a result, we needed in 1979-80, we needed a place to meet for a task force on child abuse. And the church offered free space for us to meet. As a result, we've had several people join the church as a result of that. And the Guardian Ad Litem program in the state of Florida was started here.
Wow.
And the first judge in the state to appoint a lay person as a guardian ad litem, when we no longer had to be an attorney, was Judge Chester Chance. And he became a member of the church. David Reeser was a volunteer, and he passed also, and he was very involved with the church as a result of that. And the Chance family became involved in the church because of this.
So people
And
came.
you were the first layperson. She was the first layperson in all of Florida.
So people came to you because of your strong witness in social justice. Yeah.
These are two things I didn't think of with our group, but Carol just awakened me to it. And that's things that have started because of this church in our community. One, the Pride Center had its original meetings here for a full year before they, I think it was a full year at least, before they, found space to exist. And then, the Veterans Walk along 8th Avenue, when that first began, they had just footsteps that they had cut out. And that all went on in Seminar B. All those were made there and written on. And that was space that we donated to the Vets for Peace group so that they could realize that dream. It's become a huge thing now.
Wow.
Much more permanent. But our group, we really emphasized in terms of legacies and history were things like ONA and all the social justice issues over the years, and our compact being kind of the heart and soul of things. And this was looking a bit ahead, but I liked the way I think Anne phrased this. What can we afford to do and still be who we are?
Yeah.
It was a nice phrase.
And thank you for bringing in the compact there. Having something like that really reflects who you are, it articulates it well and is functional is huge. That is a huge touchstone, particularly in times of change.
We hit on a number of things that have already been hit on. But one of the things that comes out as a legacy is that people, as they come in, we don't know what they're bringing. We trust they're bringing something. And got described in some ways is the church is like a potluck. We anticipate you're going to bring something and it's going to be good. But it's more than an anticipation. It's kind of an expectation that there's more to it.
Yeah.
This group had many wonderful things to share as well. Two things that really struck me was one, in naming some of the programs that were born or really ramped up under previous ministerial leadership. A number of those things continue and have continued through several transitions, either through new leadership, either staff or lay. So that's been wonderful. The other thing they noted was that this church went through the open and affirming process at roughly the same time that they were building the sanctuary. So I think that is really a powerful witness around doing both a building project and talking about identity at the same time. So
that speaks to the strength of your congregation, that you can have two processes like that are big at the same time.
So we had a lot of the same things. But one thing I thought was interesting was people outside the church mention UCG. We are absolutely recognized. And that also, Larry Reimer was on CNN when he was outspoken and regarding the burning of the Quran. I don't know if any of you remember, that was a big deal. And so we actually are very much a part of the community, and we are known, and that's very important.
And known for the things you want to be known for, which is really important. Yeah. Not everybody is. Yeah.
Couple comments from the Zoom folks. The church had a wonderful balance of intellectual, spiritual, and emotional stimulation, and some of that balance has felt missing. Number two, the church has gone through change before, such as when we became an ONA, Open and Affirming Congregation, and built the current building in 91, which was just mentioned. And three, in this season, we need to remember to consider how to affirm men in the church and how we have a balance of that in leadership. So those are thoughts from the Zoom folks. And then from our group in the back, a lot of it is similar to what was mentioned. One interesting theme was also the interesting sense of time and longevity that we've developed, where 30 to 40 years seems normal, 20 years seems medium, and 6 years seems really short and new.
In terms of
in terms of both membership and ministerial tenure. And so that's not, I don't know that that's necessarily a value judgment on that, but I think that's kind of a reality for some folks in how we view time.
I think it's important to name that those are kind of the frameworks that you're working with and make those frameworks visible to you.
If I can just say one more thing, we've been here since 1975, and of course the Reimers and Larry's protests against the execution of prisoners was one thing. But I want you all to remember Sydney and Grace Knight, and that every time you go by a bus stop and you see a little shelter, the Knights are the ones that made that happen. And they were active members of this church. They were atheists. They were welcome and involved in the church because the United Church was concerned about you as a person. You didn't have to be how devoted you were. And the Knights were significant members of this church.
That's really important to have lifted out, that the church loves you for who you are. The beliefs, everybody comes with their own beliefs, but the values in the person themselves.
To follow up on that briefly, about the Knights being atheists, I think that's cool. This church, with God However Known, seems to transcend Christianity per se. So this is one church where people are welcome here. If you're not a Christian, if you don't believe in God, that's okay. And there's a lot of us. There's a lot of us here. So I just wanted to say that's an important part of the legacy of this church that I'd hate to see we lose.
Agreed. And that doesn't give short shrift to the spirituality behind the church.
Yes. Are there any groups who have not shared yet? Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. So I want to be aware of time. I know y'all are typically used to about an hour in seminar. I would like for you, let me give you an option. Do you want to have a few more minutes of small group conversation around something related to this? Okay, I'm seeing some no's. That's helpful. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to encourage you to think, and this is something the transition team can help with. And you've done some of this already. What are the stories we tell about our church? What ministry, ritual, symbol, hymn, sacred text, or event best captures the spirit of UCG, you're getting at some of those things already in some of the conversations that you've had. You might want to have a little more in-depth conversation around that at some point, just as a way of having as many touchstones as you can when in a time of transition. But having said that, from what you have shared already, what does all of this, all the conversation that you've had, say about what you need to root yourselves in, what you need to stay true to during any time of transition, whether it's this one or a future one? What are the constants?
Congregation.
The congregation, okay?
The congregation. Well, I would say at the end of every service, we sing Alleluia.
Okay. The compact, okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think the biggest constant is our compact. It's the one thing that everyone is asked to uphold when they join the church. There's no creeds or doctrines or, tests that way, but we're all asked to support our church compact.
I'm wondering if the compact is let's get back. The rope swing. It's the thing you're hanging on to. And the other things like the Alleluia, like the congregation, some of the other things you name help kind of give momentum. But I'm wondering, and please push back on me if this isn't right, but if the compact as the thing that is most articulated, the thing you agree to when you join the church is the swing itself, the thing that you hold on to.
With the amount of music and how it plays a role here, I would say that's the chorus.
Mm-hmm.
The compact is our chorus. We have all these other songs and things that we do, but the compact comes back as that chorus that brings us together for the next swing.
That's beautiful.
For me,
We
it's
just
things
want
like the roller skaters. And when Larry used to hide somewhere and then be the elf at Christmas, and Sandy went floating down a zip line as an angel. I mean, I think we need that stuff. I mean, that's so spirit lifting for us. And it also says something about who we are.
Yes. So maybe this isn't a rope swing, maybe it's a zip line. And the compact, that's another thing I would have really loved to see today is somebody on the zip line.
And I just like to add, and I hope we keep saying this, what Andy always said, which is, now that the worship is over, let the service begin. That's what brought me to UCG. I wasn't going to go to anywhere that wasn't ridiculously left wing.
I heard that all through worship. I hear that in all that you're saying. The worship is important. It grounds you. But the service, I mean, there is a strong sense of being sent out of that groundedness to do good in the world.
The compact to me is sort of the central issue. However, the genius of the compact was that it intended to be inclusive. Do we need to look at it and make sure that it is inclusive, especially in the fact that we are clearly welcoming to people who don't believe in God? And what does that mean when we say we gather to worship God, however known? Is, when we talk about change and growth, are there ways that we need to be more inclusive?
Okay. Thank you for that question.
And when I joined and had to give my little spiel, I said about the compact, for God, however known or unknown.
When I first joined, I of course had some quibble about it, and I at the end of it, it says for all people, the last part of the class. And I said, well, what about nature and creation? It seems like that should be here. And I remember being told at the time, well, we'll get to that. But when we first started, it said for all men. So I shut up for a while.
Progress is sometimes incremental. Yeah.
I think the compact is powerful and a sacred text for our church, but I think for a lot of folks, and probably myself included, really what we're out there doing is as or more important in terms of an anchoring force or providing the rope.
I don't think I've ever heard the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed here said once, and I'm glad. I think the compact covers all the bases as far as I'm concerned. Just an aside, I just think UCG is wonderful because there's so many retired pastors that come here from all different faiths, and I think that speaks volumes to the inclusivity of the church. And I think that's just speaks volume. And that's just so, intangible for me. But it's so enriching at the same time.
And just as a concept Daryl brought up, change is a reality here, and change is deeply embedded in our DNA. And enough so that one of the great lines in this church that you'll hear almost every Sunday is, "It's not like this every Sunday."
I agree with everything that's been said, but I also think we have some wonderful rituals that we repeat year after year. The gathering of the waters in August when we come back after summer, our Advent celebrations, our things before Easter. There are just so many things that are consistent that different ministers have brought and we have continued to do. And that, to me, is also reassuring. So.
Okay, there's a story there, I'm sure. Any other closing thoughts or questions?
So, you may know I'm Alan, I'm chair of the Board of Business. We're talking about change and things like that. In my opinion, what's really, and this is a further larger conversation we're going to have there, is the practical reality of what we face as a congregation. We have some failing infrastructure. We've heard about this in various congregational meetings. We've lost a minister. How do we set up our leadership to go forward with that too? So what the conversation for me, because that's my job as the chair of the Board of Business, is we have to move to that. Let's get practical and let's talk about what we need to do, what we can do, and how are we going to do whatever we decide we need to do. And we're not going to do that today, but this is good that we're grounding ourselves in who we are and where we are. I feel that we all kind of agree who we are and where we are. But the reality in the next 6 months or so, when I come before you in January with a budget, there's going to be some decisions in that. And we're going to have those conversations in your committees, with yourselves, with the staff, the ministers, and the Board of Business. And we're going to have to agree, this is what we can do, and we're all going to reach in our pocket and we're going to see if we can really do it. And I think that's the real conversation we need to turn to sooner rather than later. Because I got to make a budget for you guys.
Sure.
That's my 2 cents, or $966,000, which is what the current budget is.
Appreciate. Say you are right where you need to be right now. It feels like you are pretty secure in who you are as a congregation, and you are raising some important questions that will need to be answered. And so you are where you need to be.
Are we going to talk about where we want to go today? Okay.
Not today.
Yeah, now I want to know when that.
Yeah. Today was just about grounding, celebrating, talking about what change looks like at a zoomed out level.
I just want to reflect back on it's never the same way twice. And I think why we are so good with that kind of change is because of this shared expectation or understanding that we do so arm in arm, or we do so together. And there's this trust or this faith of, I may not know where you're going with the roller skates, but I'm here for it. Right. And so we sort of give each other that. And I think if we can tap into that as we navigate whatever the rope is, I think we'll be better for it.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate your engagement. I appreciate all that you have shared, your energy, your passion for this church. I can't, it is good for my soul to hear that. And so I want to offer you this quote in closing. Hope is not an outcome, a product, or a projection. Hope, first and foremost, is a story we live in, a story we can cultivate and perpetuate. And you have done a good job of telling that story today. Continue to live in it, continue to cultivate it, and pull these essential threads from your past into a future that honors who you are and what you can still yet be. Thank you. Thank you for your help.
Thank you. You do it.
Mm.